Welcome to another Infographic Instant with Brian Michael. In this episode, we'll be asking how important are international financial centers and their elite advisors for China's going out firms. To provide an overview of the paper from which this infographic comes, the paper looks at why Chinese companies don't use local firms and consequently why they choose advisors that are completely disconnected from the geography of both the acquirer and the target, and we assess the extent to which big elite advisors, as opposed to advisors from international financial centers, play a role in the going out story. When we think about advisory, we think about elite advisors as coming from international financial centers, but there's no reason why we need to automatically equate international financial centers with these very large law firms and investment banks. So to the extent that we can understand something about the way Chinese companies choose advisors, and whether they're choosing the elite advisor themselves or whether they're actually voting with their yuan for the international financial center, that tells us something about the geography of finance in general. Turning our attention to the infographic, there's three messages of importance as we go through our series on this paper. The first point is that elite advisors certainly come from the international financial centers. Going out firms that wanted an elite advisor more often than not chose those elite advisors from international financial centers, quite simply because that's where they are based. So in our particular sample, we see that bulge bracket banks, those are banks in the top 10 by transaction value over the period 2000 to 2014. Those bulge bracket banks located in international financial centers roughly comprised 40% of that sample. We look at big law based in an international financial center, and that is close to 20-25%. So looking now at the second point, it's that more non-elite law firms come from outside international financial centers than banks. This is a slightly more subtle point, and this is a point where we are comparing non-elite firms, and we want to know, well, those non-elite firms, are they coming from international financial centers or not? So just looking at this infographic at the bank column you see here, and comparing that with the law column. So those two columns represent advisors that don't come from bulge bracket financial advisors or big law firms. And what we see is that the relative proportion of those quote-unquote ordinary advisors, there's a much higher proportion of them in the law advisory sphere than in the financial advisory sphere. The third point to note is that more bulge bracket banks are not coming from international financial centers than big law firms. And again, this is a very subtle point in order to understand the differences in the way that these financial centers are competing for Chinese business. To make this point geographically, imagine a line coming from this tall black bar in the corner drawn down to the black bar you can barely see in the back. And compare that with the difference in the two red dotted bars you see in the foreground. So we see that ordinary law firms are much higher as a proportion in not based in an international financial center than the elite advisors, particularly those financial elite advisors in IFC, compared with those elite law advisors based in an international financial center. So there's something that is twisting or distorting the incentives more toward these big bulge bracket banks, And conversely, there's something twisting or turning incentives more toward these ordinary law firms not based in an international financial center. This has been another Infographic Instant with Brian Michael.